So today I'm going to be taking a look at a watch from Bell & Ross. This is the first time I've ever had one of their watches in person, and let's just see what it's all about.
We're going to have a diameter of 38.5 millimeters, a lug to lug of 45.8, a height of 11 millimeters, and a lug width of 20. So some other general specifications of this watch, we're going to have the Bell & Ross caliber 302, which is basically just a rebadged Sellita SW300. Currently mine is running at about -2 seconds a day. I don't know if they actually do any kind of regulation to it themselves or anything, but overall mine's running really well, and I would assume yours would too. It has a domed, very, very domed sapphire crystal with AR coating. They don't state whether the AR coating is on the front or the underside, but there is AR coating. We're going to have super luminova for all the lume on the face of the watch, and 100 meters of water resistance. Unfortunately, no screw down crown. Moving into the dial here, and simplicity is really key. Basically, it kind of gives an Explorer-esque vibe. We have a 36912, very clean. Bell & Ross obviously takes inspiration from a lot of, aviation gear kind of gauges and whatnot. So it does have a very clean look to it, ultimately just legible. You got this nice kind of matte black background, which is kind of almost showing up as more of a, there we go, you kind of see the matte blackness there. But we got a matte black background, some stark white for all the numerals, the indices. We have some nice silver hands to add a little bit of a pop to the legibility, really. It's hard to see here, but when we zoom in, you can actually tell half of the hands are polished and the other is kind of in this blasted finish. It's kind of weird, I haven't seen that before. Usually it's either like half polished, half brushed, but I guess it kind of just thins out the hands visually a little bit and makes one side glint more than the other. So just little details like that. Here we can see we have the date at 4:30. Usually I'm not really a big fan of off-center dates. I'd really prefer it at the 3 or the 6. But here I think it's actually executed pretty well. You don't really notice it that often. It is just kind of there. It's color matched, so it doesn't stand out. If they would have put it in white, it definitely would have been something I think would have been a negative about the watch. But here, I think it actually just really blends into the design. Obviously, because you don't have the watch in person, you're going to kind of focus on that a little more than maybe I do here when having it in the metal. But again, it kind of just blends into the dial, just becomes part of the design. Would I have preferred a no date? Yes, but it's not bad as it is. I really like how Bell & Ross kept very minimal text. They literally just have their branding as well as automatic. They don't have any statement of water resistance, model name, model number, nothing like that. You can also see that we have little nice details like this kind of airplane inspired counterbalance. So really cool design here, very, very simple. There's definitely a bulbous quality to a lot of the elements on the dial. The 12, 3, 6, 9 all have a kind of dimensionality to them, as well as the 5-minute markers definitely have some depth. They're not just flat on the dial, and you can really tell that in person. And kind of like the last thing I'll note here is we do have a sort of sword style handset. It kind of is really a modified sword style hand because the hour hand is much thinner and kind of more elegant in a way than most sword style hands are, and the minute hand is a lot thinner. It's almost like a baton hand in itself. So I think that almost kind of is a weird choice to have such a thin minute hand, but definitely not too bad of a handset. I appreciate I'm not just going for some generic kind of regular handset, I would say. So zooming in here really close on the dial, we can see the dial does actually have this kind of very slight grainy texture to it. It has that kind of classic color play where there's like, because this dial is black, it has kind of like light gray, it has little speckles of almost white in it. So it comes together to create this kind of surface that, although it is a matte, although it is a black, it kind of does have a little dynamicism to it. So I really like when they implement this kind of texture, and you do see it on a lot of watches, but here again it is utilized, and it's utilized well. And here you can kind of see what I was talking about earlier. All the printing and it just has this kind of bulbous quality to it. It looks, like it has life to it. It has some dimensionality, it has some flair. The 12 there, as you can see, just really does have a little bit of depth to it because of that super luminova application, which is really nice. Same thing for all the 5-minute markers there. I really like how, even though they did go with a super luminova, the color temperature doesn't stray too far away from the other white elements on the dial. So overall, Bell & Ross did a good job of just matching everything together. As you can see, we have this whited out second hand. It's not actually completely white. It's more of this kind of fuzzied out texture, almost like it has a complete application of Super Luminova to it. Off the top of my head, I don't believe the second hand is completely loomed. It would be awesome if it was, but I don't think it is. But it does give that kind of look of being loomed, that same kind of texture, that same kind of color. So that is an attention to detail I do appreciate. Taking a look at the hands here, and they are a little bit rougher than I would like to see for this price range of around $2,000 retail. But as you can see, again, we have that kind of polish on the right side there, this kind of almost silver blasted appearance on the left side. Really interesting take. I've never seen this done on a watch before. But overall, I mean, the hands do look nice. The Lume application is really, really nicely done. It's all flat, it's completely uniform, no imperfections in the Lume. And I don't really even see any imperfections in the dial itself other than the kind of blemishes and little roughness on the hour hand and the minute hand there. So overall, it's a pretty good dial. It's pretty clean. I like the roundness to the numerals. The date window doesn't even look bad at this magnification. So yeah, good job, Bell & Ross. So moving on to the case of this watch, and just like the dial, they kept it simple. The lugs are a little bit thinner than you would kind of almost expect from a more military-leaning watch like this, but I think Bell & Ross kind of tries to straddle that line between dressy and military-inspired. And I think maybe that can be echoed in the fact that they put it on a leather strap here. But looking at the case more closely, as you can see, we have a circular brushing along the lug tops there. Similar type of brushing, just uniform along the bezel. High polish on the sides, which is kind of interesting. I wouldn't really expect this watch to be polished anywhere, but I guess it's nice. It just shows that they kind of took an extra step to add a different finishing, although it doesn't necessarily add to the watch in a sense of chamfers or anything like that. You have this nice kind of blasted Bell & Ross crown with the ampersand logo there. As you can see, overall the watch is very, very thin in its profile. The case back is kind of rather bulbous, but the lugs come to almost just meet that case back. So it will wear well on the wrist. It doesn't wear too awkwardly. The case back, as you can see, is pretty plain, just some general information about water resistance and whatnot there. And overall, pretty much a simple, no-nonsense case. They kind of almost want you to focus on the dial and just the overall design without distracting you with any crazy finishing or polishing or etc. One thing they kind of do have fun with is the super domed crystal, as they kind of call it. It is quite domed compared to other crystals. I mean, more often you see companies kind of going for a boxed style crystal. So to see actually such a heavy dome with an actual sapphire, it definitely is a little bit harder to do. It's nice to see. It gives a nice distortion at very extreme angles, but it definitely does not give the same warmth acrylic crystal would give. But it is nice that they kind of gave a domed crystal to fit the vintage vibe, and I think it just looks nice. So moving on to how this watch wears. Earlier I was wearing my Zodiac Super Seawolf. This is the White Wolf edition. And here we have the Bell & Ross on my 6.5-inch wrist. And as I think you can just kind of see, it wears really, really well. It again is not very long in lug-to-lug length. It has a nice constrained diameter. And I think it just gives a nice package overall on the wrist. You get that classic styling of the 369. It kind of almost is pseudo-explorer in its styling. But it isn't a direct copy in any way. It uses a different handset. It uses a different typography. It just kind of gives it a different feel. So it's a nice overall package. It is very, very thin. It kind of almost has a somewhat bell shape there. So it is comfortable on the wrist. It, I think, looks good. As you can see there, the lugs just kind of curve down to meet the wrist pretty nicely. It definitely doesn't hang up above the wrist too long. Every time you flex your wrist, it doesn't dig in at any point. The crown is both well sized and well shaped to where it doesn't really dig. It still has enough kind of purchase for winding the crown and whatnot. So yeah, overall I think really good design, really good fit, and I like to see watches at a smaller size, of course. And what kind of review would this be if I didn't put this watch on a more military leaning strap? This is a beautiful pajama style strap from Blue Shark Straps. It is super comfortable. I love this type of NATO style. I think the fact that it has this kind of white center line down the middle really just blends in with the watch's design. It has a nice continuity between the markers. And I think the shade of kind of really dark green just really works with the watch well. It gives it that very army-esque look and feel to the watch. There you have it on my wrist. Again, I just think this strap works wonderfully. I do wear my NATO straps to wear all the excesses on the bottom. I just think it looks a little bit cleaner that way. And yeah, really, really nice. And here we are completely changing up a look again. Maybe you're tired of straps and you kind of want to try a bracelet option. This is a kind of mesh style from Watch Gecko. I'm not 100% sure if they still make this bracelet, but I'm sure they do. It's a nice thickness to it. It feels very sturdy, very well made, and I think it does work really well on the watch. So here we have it on the metal strap, that kind of all metal look to the watch. This actually is kind of like a more polished tone to the metal, but I don't think it detracts from the brushed nature of the watch at all. And overall, I just think I really like the monochrome nature of this watch for the fact that it can be a watch chameleon. It can go with a bunch of different colors, a bunch of different strap types, and just think it looks good. Kudos to Bell & Ross. Moving on to a Lume shot, and of course bringing in the classic Snoopy next to it. As you can see, I think Bell & Ross did a pretty good job with the Lume application here. I'm a little, I guess, disappointed that there isn't any Lume at all on the seconds hand, but overall, I mean, legibility is very high with the Lume. The 12-3-6-9, the hands, the 5-minute markers, I mean, you really can tell the time in the dark. Does this Lume application last forever? No, not at all. I wish they would have applied it maybe a little bit thicker, maybe in a BGW9, because I think on average that just kind of seems to last longer. But for what has been applied, it is done well. As you can see, a little bit more applied on the hands than on the rest of the watch, but again, very good look. Looming the watch back up and comparing it to the Snoopy, as you can see, the color temperatures are pretty similar. Again, the hands on the Bell & Ross are shining a little brighter than anything else on it. Usually that's something that would kind of annoy me, but as long as the color temperatures look the same in direct sunlight, which they do, then I'm fine with it. Overall, decent application. As you can see, the Bell & Ross already is dying off a little bit and getting a little less bright, but hey, while it's shining, it still is good.
So on to pros and cons of this watch, and I think one of the major pros is kind of like a combination of the design and the sizing of it. For the sizing, of course, is under 40 millimeters. It wears well. It's a very slim case relatively, so it all works well together. But the design-wise, it takes some cues from the Explorer, but it is its own thing. It has its own kind of flair to the watch. It's not a carbon copy, and I think it executes just basically the design well. It looks very clean. I think the date window, while I don't think it's needed, is well integrated. And I just dig the design of the watch. Another main pro of the watch, I think, will be the sapphire crystal. Again, the really heavy dome to it is just really, really cool. I don't think it's a make or break aspect of the watch. If they would have went with a flat sapphire crystal, it would have been nice because it would have made it a very, very thin watch. But I do think the dome adds to the aesthetic. It adds to the vintage kind of callback for the watch is trying to go for. It is just basically, I think, a nice design addition to the watch. I personally like it. I like how you get some distortion at some angles. I don't think it looks out of place. And if they can do it, why not, you know? So one of my last kind of almost biggest pros of the watch is how versatile it is on other straps. And it goes from anything from a very casual kind of like Perlon/NATO to leather. I don't think it works on every kind of leather strap. I do think some of the very, very dressy leathers kind of battled the design aesthetic of the watch a little too much, but it can really fit a variety of different straps, different colors, different outfits by extension. So I think the fact that it has so much versatility built into the watch is really fun, especially if it's going to be maybe your only black watch. So moving on to cons, one of my biggest cons with the watch is, although I love the case, I also don't love the case. And that's mainly because the lug profile, it is a little bit too thin for my liking. A lot of the design elements on this watch are thin, but I feel like for the 38mm size, for kind of the almost masculine-y/pilot style they're going for, I think if they would have made the lugs a little beefier, kind of almost similar to more of a Rolex style, I'm not saying make it an oyster case, just making it a little beefier at the lugs to kind of give it a better stance on the wrist, almost maybe even lend it towards straps a little bit more. So that's just a slight design change I would have gone for. I don't think it's bad as it is. It's just something I would have changed. Other than that, personally, I would have foregone the date window. I don't love the kind of 4:30-ish date application. I wish it was just a no date. It would have been a lot cleaner. Is the date integration done really well? Yes. Would I prefer to no date? Also yes. And kind of just my last con is, I think, the pricing of the watch. It's almost around $2,000 new. Bell & Ross is not one of those brands that keep their value on the secondary market. They don't even keep their value within an AD. So in theory, if you can get 20-30% off of retail and be okay with it, or just wait to get it used. I got mine for, I think, a smidgen over maybe $1,100. So it can be found for pretty good prices on the used market, gray market, at a discount from an AD. So as long as you do that, don't pay retail for it. I don't think it's necessarily worth retail, but if you're putting this up to something head-to-head like a Sin 556, when you start going into like used prices for the both of them, or used AD prices, I think it kind of holds up pretty well. It doesn't necessarily have as much of an overbuilt nature as the Sin 556, but I think it actually is a little more versatile. The Sin 556 is a little bit more of a tool watch. It's just more dedicated towards that area, and I think this Bell & Ross kind of is able to play both fields a little better, in my opinion. So my final thoughts on the watch, and basically again, this is my first experience with the Bell & Ross brand. You kind of hear a lot in collector circles about them being one of those brands where it's like they charge a little too much and they don't offer as much as other brands. And I do think that's kind of true if you're buying it at full retail. As long as you can get a little bit of a discount or you buy used, I do think it's pretty good value what they're offering here. The design is good. The quality is there. There are a couple design elements I would have changed with the watch overall, but that's just my personal preference. And that doesn't detract from that fact that it is a great watch by itself. So overall, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I don't think you'd be disappointed at all if you decided to go for it. I don't think this is a watch that's on many people's radars because I think Bell & Ross is both a little overlooked and kind of people don't know this model either. I don't see a lot of it on Instagram or reviews of it or anything like that. So that's kind of why I wanted to get my hands on it. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's a good watch. If you get one, let me know how it goes. And I hope you got something from this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another one.